Well, hello everybody. Phil here from the Blue Envelope channel. Well, being that Christmas is this month, I figured we have to discuss the interesting connection between Jehovah's Witnesses not celebrating Christmas and the time the society tried to make their followers start using a proprietary calendar that the society invented. It's a super quirky chapter in Watchtower history. After the Mormons moved out to Salt Lake City, Mormon leaders tried to make their members start using a new alphabet for writing that they had invented from scratch. They called it Deseret. Well, as you might expect, it died a swift death after just a few years. But Jehovah's Witnesses may be the only group that tried to make their adherents start using an entirely new timekeeping system, with days, months, and years completely unrelated to what the rest of the world was using. So if you were to ask the average person on the street what they know about Jehovah's Witnesses, you'd probably hear a couple things. They preach door to door, they don't celebrate holidays, and maybe that they don't take blood transfusions. And those things are all true today. But none of them have been true for all of Jehovah's Witness history. And so zeroing in on celebrating Christmas today, the Witnesses definitely celebrated Christmas when they started, as essentially all Christian religions do. The Witnesses did it as late as about 1926, so roughly 45 years, or about a third of the time Witnesses have been in existence, they celebrated Christmas. Now, interestingly, as early as 1881, the Bible students, like many Christians, also did recognize the pagan or non-Christian origins of Christmas. And so if we look at the book God's Kingdom Rules on page 101, paragraph 8, it tells us this: the Bible students long acknowledged that Christmas has pagan roots and that Jesus was not born on December 25th. Zion's Watchtower of December 1881 stated, "Millions were brought into the church from paganism, but the change was mostly in name, for the pagan priests became Christian priests, and the pagan holidays came to be called by Christian names, Christmas being one of these holidays." So, right from the start, it was known that the holidays had pagan origins by the Bible students. But the general feeling among them was, meh, who really cares? Notice, for example, what the Watchtower had to say in the December 1st, 1904 issue on page 364. It says, "Even though Christmas is not the real anniversary of our Lord's birth, but more properly the Annunciation Day, or the date of his human begetting, nevertheless, since the celebration of our Lord's birth is not a matter of divine appointment or injunction, but merely a tribute of respect to him, it is not necessary for us to quibble particularly about the date. We may as well join with the civilized world in celebrating the grand event on the day which the majority celebrate, Christmas Day." Now, I love this quote for a couple different reasons. First of all, for a religion like Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a high control group, it has decreed that it has to decide for its followers what is good versus what is bad. And so the leaders first have to decide on a basic guiding principle for things like holidays. They have to decide, is the most important thing what the origins of a practice are, or is it more important how it is viewed today? As we see from this article, the decision in Russell's time was, the main thing is how something is viewed today. Is it considered a good Christian practice now? And if so, well, what does it really matter if the origins were a bit dodgy? So that's how things stood back then. Secondly, did you notice this article makes a really interesting statement? It says Christmas is the date of Jesus' human begetting. In other words, Jesus was conceived, Mary became pregnant on Christmas Day. Now, what they're basing this statement on beyond straight up divine revelation, I'm not quite sure. I'll leave to you to figure out. But Jehovah's Witnesses may be the only organization shedding light on a sorely neglected area of theological research, the timing of Mary's ovulatory cycle. Now, has anybody in history wished they had this information? Maybe not. That's probably just because they're spiritual slackers. Fortunately, Jehovah's Witnesses are on the job. Now, you may have thought that immaculate conception means it doesn't matter when a woman ovulates, but there you would be quite wrong. Check out the Watchtower, March 15th, 2008, page 30. It poses the question, did Mary's egg cell or ovum have any part in her pregnancy? Answer. For Mary's child to be a true descendant of her ancestors Abraham, Judah, and David, as God had promised, her ovum had to contribute toward her pregnancy. However, Jehovah's Holy Spirit was used in transferring the perfect life of God's Son and causing the conception. It would appear that this canceled out any imperfection existing in Mary's ovum, and from the very start protected the developing embryo from anything hurtful. So now we know. Well, we know how an average menstrual cycle works, so now it's simply a matter of working backwards. If Jesus, as the Watchtower says, was conceived on Christmas Day, well, then Mary's period began about 2 weeks earlier. Now, obviously you realize that the great Jewish festival of dedication, or as we know it today, Hanukkah, falls shortly before Christmas each year. Hanukkah began on Kislev 25 on the Jewish calendar, and it ran for 8 days. So you'll notice if you look at a menorah, there's 8 lights, one lit up each day. For example, this year, Hanukkah runs from December 10th to December 18th. So what we find is that Mary had her period smack dab in the middle of Hanukkah week, which must have been rather inconvenient, both from a physical standpoint and because any woman in Israel was considered unclean for a week when she got her period each month. Now, I ask you, point me to another religion which knows the Bible so deeply that it can pick out a random young Jewish woman from 2,000 years ago and tell you when she got her period in December of the year 2 BCE. Clearly, we're talking about the one true religion here. Case closed. In the decades that the Bible students celebrated Christmas, you get all kinds of fun references in the literature. They typically published articles about Christmas every December each year. The JW Facts page about Christmas highlights one especially great one. This was an ad in the December 7th, 1921 Golden Age magazine. It's an ad for miracle oil. The ad advises Golden Age readers that this is a special offer so that they can make some extra money for Christmas by reselling miracle oil. The Miracle Oil Company was one of those companies that was kind of, but not exactly, owned by the Watchtower Society. It was a time when they tried expanding into car repair products. Christmas, miracle oil, and multi-level marketing, obviously just what you'd expect to find in the religion that had been handpicked by God just 2 years earlier. So Christmas was a good time for Jehovah's people in those halcyon days of the early 1920s. But by the late 20s, things had taken a sharp turn under Rutherford's leadership. We return to the book God's Kingdom Rules. Page 102 and paragraph 9 tells us this. The article, The Origin of Christmas, in the Golden Age of December 14th, 1927, noted that Christmas is a pagan celebration, focuses on pleasures, oh boy, and involves idol worship. The article made it clear that the celebration was not ordered by Christ, and concluded with this pointed statement about Christmas. The fact that the world, the flesh, and the devil are in favor of its perpetuation and observance is a final and conclusive argument against its celebration by those who are dedicated wholly to the service of Jehovah. Not surprisingly, the Bethel family did not celebrate Christmas that December or ever again. In December 1928, the Society gave a talk on its radio stations condemning Christmas, and then reprinted the talk in the Golden Age. It warned, everyone is aware of the spirit of frivolity, debauchery, drunkenness, and revelry so prevalent during the Christmas season. Surely none of these things honor either Jehovah God or his Son. I ask you, as you look at this photo of Christmas 1926 at Brooklyn Bethel, presents piled at each seat, can't you just see the spirit of frivolity, debauchery, drunkenness, and revelry seething through that room? Those Bethelites were a bunch of wild and crazy guys. And so it was, Christmas bit the dust in 1927. 1928 brought the end of Easter and of using the cross. Valentine's Day died in 1929. Mother's Day was killed off in 1931, birthdays in 1936, and New Year's celebrations in 1946. So what we're seeing in this period is a dramatic shift in the guiding principle of Watchtower leadership. Instead of what a celebration means today, it became all about the origins of a practice. And so, against this backdrop, it makes total sense that during those purge years, an effort would be put forth to replace the Gregorian calendar that most modern society uses, because the calendar itself is steeped in pagan origins. First of all, consider the very name Gregorian calendar. Why is it called Gregorian? Well, in 46 AD, Julius Caesar approved a solar-based calendar actually very similar to what we use today. However, it was a few minutes longer each year than a true solar year, and by the 1500s, the accumulated difference meant the calendar was actually off by 10 days. The Insight book explains how this was corrected. In Volume 1, page 393, it tells us, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a slight revision of the Julian calendar, whereby the leap years every 4 years were retained, but with the exception that only those century years with a number divisible by 400 were to be counted as leap years. By papal bull in 1582, 10 days were to be omitted in that year, so that the day after October 4th became October 15th. The Gregorian calendar is now in general use in most parts of the world. It is the basis for the historical dates used throughout this publication. And now you're probably starting to see the problem. Pope Gregory XIII instituted the calendar we use today, and we all know how the society feels about the Catholic Church. Not huge fans, to put it frankly. To the point that in the 1920s, the society was publishing articles about how the Ku Klux Klan was actually a pretty awesome organization. And they said this because the Catholic Church was enemies of the KKK, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That whole debacle is probably worth its own video at some point. So, using a calendar implemented by the Pope? Oh, heck no. Can you say partaking at the table of Jehovah and the table of demons? Secondly, just look at the names of some of the months. January comes from Janus, the Roman god of doorways. March comes from Mars, the Roman god of war. May, from the Greek goddess Maya. And then how about the days of the week? Well, the Wikipedia entry for Sunday has this to say. The name Sunday, the day of the sun, is derived from Hellenistic astrology, where the 7 planets, known in English as Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, each had an hour of the day assigned to them, and the planet which was regent during the first hour of any day of the week gave its name to that day. During the 1st and 2nd century, the week of 7 days was introduced into Rome from Egypt, and the Roman names of the planets were given to each successive day. So the days of the week come from Greek astrology. Now, the names in English have evolved from being exactly the Roman names of the 7 astrological planets, although from a witness standpoint, they haven't really evolved for the better. So we start out with Sunday, pretty straightforward. Then we have Monday, or Moon Day. Now, Tuesday comes from Tyr, a god in Norse mythology, the god of single combat, law, and justice. He corresponds to the Roman god Mars. Wednesday is named for Woden, which is the Anglo-Saxon name for Odin, the famous Norse god. Now, this is very troubling for witnesses because the religion of Anglo-Saxons in this time of early medieval England is simply called Anglo-Saxon paganism or heathenism. Thursday, or Thor's Day, is named for Thor, the Norse god of thunder. Friday, meaning Day of Frigg, is a term relating both to the Norse goddess Frigg, if I'm pronouncing that right, and the Roman goddess Venus. Now, Venus was equivalent to the Greek goddess Aphrodite, and Aphrodite in turn was equivalent to the Mesopotamian goddess Astarte, or Ishtar. And witnesses have had a great deal to say about Astarte, or Ishtar, over the years. And finally, Saturday, or Saturn's Day, the Roman god of all sorts of odds and ends. Saturnalia is the December celebration of the god Saturn, and again, the Society has had much to say over the years about Saturnalia and its connection to Christmas. So, as Bible students were on a campaign to root out everything with a pagan origin from their lives, it's only natural that the Gregorian calendar would get the stink eye. And so it was that at the end of 1934, the 1935 yearbook was released. And on page 168, witnesses found a perplexing item, a fully formed calendar, but one unlike anything they'd seen before. It still had 12 months and 7 days per week, but each month had 29 or 30 days, and the names of the months and of the days of the week were completely different. The only explanation was a note at the bottom which said, "A series of articles in explanation will appear in the Golden Age. Watch for them." So that was a little teaser. Then, in the March 1st, 1935 Watchtower, on page 80, a short article simply entitled Calendar appeared. Now, this one-page article essentially serves as a brief abstract of what was coming shortly in greatly expanded form in the Golden Age. It lays out the basic premise of why a good Jehovah's Witness should not be using a regular calendar, and it gives 2 basic arguments. As we look at the first paragraph there, it tells us, since the time of the rebellion in Eden, that old serpent, also called Satan, dragon, and devil, has employed all manner of subtle and deceptive methods to divert the attention of man from Almighty God. This is particularly noted with reference to the calendars for the division of time. Now, you may recognize that this is basically the same line of reasoning that the Society used to explain why it's wicked to celebrate Mother's Day. While calendars and Mother's Day seem like pretty nice, innocuous things, actually they are clever Trojan horses that Satan is using to win in the universal war going on between him and Jehovah God. And the second main reason to reject the calendar is, as mentioned, that Pope Gregory XIII is the one that approves starting to use the calendar we currently have, and anything the Catholic Church does is, of course, in league with the devil. Now, this article also explains why the calendar was rolled out in the Golden Age instead of the Watchtower. The last paragraph tells us, in its yearbook for 1935, this society has published a sample calendar, and a detailed explanation of this calendar shall also be published. The space in the Watchtower is hardly sufficient for such publication, because that space is needed for other truths. The Golden Age magazine is one of the publications of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, And the Golden Age will publish the explanation of the division of time, or the calendar, and the Watchtower readers are requested to give careful consideration to the same. A series of articles covering this matter will appear within a short time in the Golden Age magazine. And that is exactly what happened. Essentially, almost a short book of about 65 pages was published across the March 13th, March 27th, and April 10th issues of the Golden Age. I appreciate this paragraph because sometimes it seems like maybe this whole calendar thing was a wacky, independent notion of Clayton Woodworth, who was the editor of the Golden Age. However, there is a couple arguments against this. For one thing, Clayton Woodworth was a key figure in the Watchtower Society. Evidently a very studious man, Woodworth is reputed to be the person who compiled the very first Watchtower Publications Index, laboriously indexing by hand 30 years of Watchtower articles. The book Apocalypse Delayed, The Exhaustive History of Jehovah's Witnesses, reports that Woodworth, along with another witness named George Fisher, was one of the co-authors of the book The Finished Mystery. And this, of course, is a book Jehovah's Witnesses are very proud of. Woodworth was also one of the 8 men sent to federal prison in 1918 alongside Rutherford, and his photo is proudly displayed in the Proclaimer's book, page 653, with the caption that maybe has just a hint of persecution complex. Sentenced to punishment more severe than was the assassin whose shot triggered World War I. Now, it's true that Woodworth also had some rather odd ideas about medical things, notably a hatred of aluminum cookware and a hatred of vaccinations, although it can certainly be said he wasn't the only top Watchtower official to have oddball ideas on medical topics. You can check out my older video on Rutherford and the radium belt for more on that subject. So, while it's probable Woodworth was the main driver behind the new calendar, and as we'll see, it's something that the Society must have spent years working on, but the endeavor clearly had the full support of Rutherford and the Watchtower Society, and the rollout occurred across all the main types of Watchtower literature: the Watchtower magazine, the Golden Age magazine, and the yearbook. So let's check out the March 13th, 35 issue of the Golden Age magazine. And on page 355, we see on the cover a pretty catchy title, actually: The Second Hand in the Timepiece of God, in 3 parts. Part 1, subtitle, An Explanation Respecting a Complete Change of Calendar, with suggestions as to how the calendar of Jehovah God can be put into effect easily and naturally without any confusion. Well, it begins by laying out its premise. And so, for example, on page 356, it tells us, in this series of articles, it will be shown that all the foregoing calendars are calendars of the devil. If that is shown to be true regarding the Gregorian, it will certainly be true of all the others. Please now take the time to examine some of the necessary details of this intricate subject. Continuing on page 358, it tells readers, the devil, of course, was the one who induced the ancestors of the present generation to name all the days of the week after heathen gods and goddesses. Neither God nor Christ nor any prophet or apostle is represented in the days of the week as now in common use. After a thorough discussion of the problems any good Christian should have with the Gregorian calendar, an extremely lengthy series of charts are introduced, which serve to establish the mathematical basis for this new calendar. It's clear from looking at all these charts that years must have been invested creating this timekeeping system. There's a footnote on page 362 which says, Master chart, from which this greatly condensed outline was drawn, is 15 feet 3 inches long, on file at the Golden Age office, where it may be seen on application. The society does a pretty good job holding on to its historical items, and I'm guessing that chart is probably still rolled up in a room somewhere at Bethel. Unfortunately, they haven't put it on display in the Warwick Museum for some odd reason. Now, the calendar itself is laid out on page 381. Let's take a closer look at it. This is the calendar for 1935, but you'll notice that the title is Jehovah's Year of Ransom 1903. That's because the 0 year on this calendar is when Jesus died. So instead of BC and AD, it's BR and YR, before ransom and year of ransom. Basically, you need to subtract roughly 32 years or so to get the correct year for the Watchtower calendar. The time the new year starts is moved from January 1st to the springtime. Also, the new year doesn't start on a set day each year. So, under the Gregorian calendar, we know that every January 1st is when a new year starts. Under Jehovah's calendar, the new year starts on a different random day each spring, whichever day that year corresponds to the vernal equinox. That definitely wouldn't be confusing at all. We see that the names of the months are different. And so the 12 months are redemption, life, visitment, freedom, vindication, hope, king, peace, order, logos, Jehovah, and temple. The names of the days of the week are also different, basically following the order of the 7 creative days in the Genesis account. And so we have light day, heaven day, earth day, star day, life day, man's day, and God's day. Seems like maybe light day and life day could have used a bit more work. They would get kind of confusing in conversation. Additionally, the days on this calendar start at sundown instead of at midnight. In the next issue of the Golden Age, it begins to line up Bible events with the new calendar, and this is continued into the 3rd issue in the series. Now recall, as the initial article said, they would demonstrate how the calendar of Jehovah God can be put into effect easily and naturally without any confusion. And so let's check out an example. This is in the April 10th issue on page 419. And we'll look at the last paragraph in that box in the middle of the page. It tells us, the date of this issue, number 406 of the Golden Age, is Star Day, Redemption 6th, Edenic Day number 2,177,593, God's Month number 73,740, Jehovah's Year of Ransom 1903. So, yeah, definitely a point to Watchtower. I had no trouble at all comprehending that. How about you? Let's look at another example from the first paragraph on this page. It tells us, it is a simple matter now to ascertain the exact date when the construction of Solomon's temple was begun. The new moon nearest the vernal equinox rose at 10:55 N, so this calendar uses D and N for day and night instead of AM and PM. So 10:55 N, light day, Edenic day number 1,093,164, BR 1067, vernal equinox number 2,993, or on the devil's calendar, 4:55 a.m., Sunday, March 16th, 1035 BC. This was the counterpart of number 73,590 in the lunation experience table. Making use of the eclipse cycles to promote greater accuracy, the next new moon rose at 4:39 N, Earth Day, Edenic Day number 1,093,193, or 10:39 p.m., Monday, April 14th. The moon was not seen that night. Hence, the second month did not begin until 45 hours later. Life Day, Life First, Edenic Day number 1,093,195, God's month number 37,019, Vernal Equinox number 2,993, or, as Satan would say, 6 p.m., Wednesday, April 16th, 1035 BC. The second day of the month was 24 hours later. The work of building the temple would hardly have begun after sundown. Therefore, the work on the temple was begun Man's Day, Life 2nd, 1067 BR, or sometime Friday morning or afternoon, April 18th, 1035 BC. Probably all that was done that day was to lay the cornerstone. And there you have it. Clearly, I think they made their point that this calendar can be put into effect easily and naturally without any confusion. I'm certainly not confused at all. No sirree. How about you? Later in the issue, they align modern-day events with the new calendar. One that caught my eye was a campaign to give the book Government to all public officials. Now, this is very interesting because witnesses here in 2020 are carrying out a very similar campaign to present a special magazine to all government officials. And so we see on page 444, it tells us, under moon number 73,657, light day, vindication 18th, Edenic day number 2,175,154, YR 1896, or on the devil's calendar, Sunday, August 5th, AD 1928, at Detroit, Michigan, there was delivered to all the world the message that Jehovah God is the people's friend, and his name will be vindicated by the establishment of a righteous government in the earth. At that time, two of the most important books in the world were released to the people: Government, which has been placed in the hands of every important public official, besides several millions in other hands, and Reconciliation, which latter is a plain statement of the gracious provision Jehovah has made to bring all men into full harmony with himself, that the obedient ones may have everlasting life on earth in contentment and complete happiness. Among intelligent thinking people, no other such constructive work on government has ever appeared as the work first named. It presents indisputable evidence showing that the peoples of earth shall have a righteous government, and explaining the manner of its establishment. Many of Jehovah's Witnesses make the government book their leader, as it goes to the heart of all the difficulties of earth. Now, if you were to go and ask any witness on earth today, they would not be able to stop talking about all the amazing things that happened from that 1930s campaign to contact every government official. And obviously, they would show off to you their copy of the 1928 book Government, which, as the article says, is one of the most important books in the world. Yes, when you consider all that first campaign accomplished, it's no wonder that the society decided to do a version 2.0 90 years later. So, now that we have the scoop on this really fascinating chapter of Watchtower history, the $10,000 question is, what happened? If you're like me, you've probably spent thousands of hours on personal study and attending meetings at the Kingdom Hall, and not one talk or magazine article was about memorizing the new days of the week, say, or helping to calculate what year of the ransom it is. Jehovah's calendar just seems to disappear as quickly as it was introduced. Well, as I'm sure you may have guessed, implementing a new calendar system that is completely different from the one 99% of the people in your town are using may not be quite as easy and natural and not confusing as the society thought. Perhaps if we're talking about a cult holed up in a commune somewhere, yes, it might work. But remember, even those Mormons were unable to get a new alphabet to stick after creating a city from scratch out in the boonies of Utah. You can just picture a brother in the purchasing department at Bethel in 1935 trying to order some paper for the printing presses. Okay, he tells the supplier, well, we'll expect that shipment on Star Day, Logos 13, YR 1903. Obviously, the story would go that the man, intrigued, accepted a Bible study and his whole family came in the truth. For a fuller picture of what happened with the calendar, we need to visit briefly the Olin Moyle saga. Now, Olin Moyle was a witness attorney who Rutherford called on to move to Bethel and help handle cases for the society. Moyle and his family arrived to Bethel in 1935, the year these calendar articles were published, and he would go on to handle many Watchtower court cases, including before the Supreme Court. In 1939, however, Moyle wrote a letter of resignation to Rutherford, protesting the many things he'd seen at Bethel, especially Rutherford's own actions, which Moyle felt didn't line up with how God's true organization should be working. Well, Moyle was immediately fired, kicked out of Bethel, and disfellowshipped. But more than that, Rutherford took Moyle's resignation as a personal betrayal, and he had Moyle's letter read to the entire Bethel family and to the Society's board of directors as an example of how Jehovah's enemies could worm their way in. 3 months later, he wrote a Watchtower article calling out Moyle by name in the Watchtower and condemning him for his libel and treason. Then we jump to the 1941 convention. This was Rutherford's last convention before his death, held in his hometown, and is fondly remembered in the literature because that's when the book Children was released. That's the time all the children sat together in the front of the auditorium and got a copy of that book. But one thing not usually mentioned is the resolution adopted at that convention. Now, unlike the convention resolutions I remember, which always seem to be very general statements about, we resolve to love Jehovah and stand for the kingdom, but the 1941 resolution was all about one thing, denouncing Olin Moyle. It was, from beginning to end, a complete anti-Moyle screed, and as witness resolutions always are, it was duly adopted by the 65,000 witnesses in attendance. Moyle would sue the Watchtower Society for libel, the libel of accusing him of libel, and he ultimately won the case. He was awarded $15,000, or in 2020 money, about $225,000. Now, what's interesting is one of the first issues that Moyle mentioned in his letter to Rutherford. He writes, "Shortly after coming to Bethel, we were shocked to witness the spectacle of our brethren receiving what is designated as a trimming from you. The first, if memory serves me correct, was a tongue lashing given to C.J. Woodworth. Woodworth, in a personal letter to you, stated something to the effect that it would be serving the devil to continue using our present-day calendar. For that, he was humiliated, called a jackass, and given a public lambasting. Others have been similarly treated." So evidently, Woodworth was more than a bit disappointed that the society didn't immediately go all in on the new calendar he'd worked so hard on, and he got a good trimming from Rutherford when he brought it up. Then, a month after the calendar articles had been published, there was a terse one-paragraph article in the May 1st Watchtower. Since this marks the rather ignominious end of Jehovah's calendar that had been born just weeks before, let's check it out. And this was on page 142. It says, "To have a correct system of reckoning time is desirable. It is well known that the calendars heretofore used have been incorrect and unsatisfactory. For this reason, the Golden Age published facts concerning a system of reckoning time, obtaining the important data from the Scriptures and some from astronomy. Seeing there is a danger of giving importance to this and to the exclusion of weightier matters, this note of warning is here sounded. God's people should keep in mind the Pyramid Delusion. Little dig at Russell there. And the speculations that accompanied the study of chronology, and the pitfalls into which these things led many. Do not fall into a similar trap. It is of far more importance to understand our commission and to perform it than to understand at just what time Adam was created. Be reasonable and moderate. Avoid wild speculation as to at what time and in what manner things future will come to pass. Be sure that you always are guided by the counsel of the Lord's word. The statements in the Golden Age are not dogmatic, but are worthy of due and careful consideration. I really like that last sentence, which seems to say everything and also nothing, written by a true attorney, as Rutherford was. Well, no doubt most witnesses had to be very relieved to see this article appear, as now the pressure was off to adopt this, let's be honest, extremely complicated new timekeeping system. And as far as I'm aware, this is the very last time the new calendar was ever mentioned in the literature. It went down the memory hole, and it would be surprising if any Bethelites today even knew what they were looking at if they ran across that 15-foot-long chronology chart in a storage room at Warwick. Looking back at this episode in JW history, it's pretty easy to come away thinking, man, they had some pretty weird ideas back then. But I will say my impression is a little more along the lines of, well, why is it okay to keep using the Gregorian calendar if what is important is whether modern practices have pagan origins? Is it really cool that witnesses today have calendars hanging in their kitchens and on their phones, plastered with the names of pagan gods and goddesses, which are organized according to the tenets of Greek astrology? Is it appropriate to be mentioning Thor, Odin, Mars, and other gods during the meetings when talking about the dates of upcoming events? In more recent years, the Insight book made an attempt to square this exception to the rule about not doing things that started out pagan. In Volume 2, page 1065, it talks about how after Israel's 70-year exile, they began using foreign names of months of the year, including Tammuz for the fourth month. Tammuz was a pagan Babylonian god, and in fact, Israel getting involved with Tammuz is mentioned in Ezekiel as one reason for its destruction in 607 BCE. The Insight book explains, it should be remembered that they were then a subjugated people, obliged to deal with and report to the foreign powers dominating them. And in view of this, it is no strange thing if they utilized the names of the months employed by these foreign powers. The Gregorian calendar used today has months named after the gods Janus and Mars and the goddess Juno, as well as for Julius and Augustus Caesar, yet it continues to be used by Christians who are subject to the superior authorities. Now, this is a very interesting passage. It seemed to be saying that if the government says to do something involving pagan worship, Christians need to do it. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't quite sound like the Jehovah's Witnesses I was part of. And really, this just gets to the crux of the problem. Avoiding everything with pagan origins is impossible. We know Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, so any practice that has existed for more than 2,000 years has pagan or non-Christian roots. Spoiler alert, that's pretty much every facet of human society. The JW Facts page on pagan practices is an amazing summary of the randomness of decisions the society has made on whether something is acceptable or not for Jehovah's Witnesses. Weddings, an awesome case in point. Check out this list. Keep in mind, each of these customs we'll mention has a pagan origin. See if you can figure out whether it's allowed or not allowed for witnesses. Okay, throwing rice, not allowed. The bride wearing a veil, allowed. Throwing the bouquet, not allowed. Bridesmaids wearing the same color, allowed. Wedding marches, Not allowed. Wedding rings. Allowed. Toasting the bride and groom. Not allowed. Wedding cake. Allowed. Good times, huh? I tell you, is there any better way to celebrate Christmas than by discussing arcane religious beliefs from the 1930s? I think not. Well, coming to the end, I'm thinking that maybe instead of Life Day and Light Day, we could solve that similarity issue and add a little gender diversity to balance the Man's Day and make one of them Woman's Day. I don't know, maybe? Maybe that's still too binary? We'll have to think about it. Meanwhile, I just want to wish every one of you a very Merry Man's Day, Temple 25th this year, which is, of course, Year of Our Ransom, 1988. You take care now.